10 o'clock, we're going to start our next session. So, and on railroad, we run on time, or at least we try to call the trues on time. So, unlike my wife, who's always 20 minutes late, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. She wasn't in the room, was she?
It's being recorded.
Pre-recorded. Oh, God. I'm dead again.
We'll send it.
Good morning, all. My name is Randy Tamura. I'm representing the Railcar Repair Committee, the committee within MARTS. This is our second year of making presentations. This group was put together primarily to support the Railcar Repair Shop network because there wasn't really a group out there, and Neil West came to me a couple of years ago and said, why don't you guys have that? And we said, darn good idea. So from that, we started this organization. So without further ado, we're going to kick off this second session on a presentation that really started last year. Last year we had a presentation on a panel discussion on a quality audit, how to conduct them, what are the things that trip you up, what are the things that really help you get through an audit. And at the conclusion of that, we had a really good session, and our committee got together again and just said, well, what should we talk about this coming year? And we concluded that we really didn't spend a lot of time on the quality manual. So that's what this session is going to be about, is not only how do you put together a quality manual, and there's going to be a really good session tomorrow Gary's going to put on that talks about how to put a quality manual together. But what we're really going to talk about today are the things that, how do you really implement it? And one of the things that came to mind this morning was, as an auditor, how do you, when you walk into a shop, do you know that it's actually being used? It's not just a book that's hanging on the wall someplace. So it's what are those things? So this morning we're going to have a panel discussion, and I'm careful about putting things on this thing. We have a very good panel put together this morning. Really industry experts on not just a quality manual, but how you implement it. So Don Gillen will give a presentation. He's Manager Quality Audit for AAR TTCI. 25 years of railroad experience, about 13 years with TTCI. And Don, I'm going to introduce everybody else first.
Okay.
You're good. Just stay standing. You're good. A repeat panelist from last year, Dean Matzo, who's Vice President of Quality for Trinity Rail. He's also a representative of the Quality Audit Committee for the RSI. So again, a good conduit to the industry. Joe Bowling, Quality Manager for CF Industries. He spent 38 years, very young looking 38 years from GATX. And then Gary Anderson from Quality Process, Alderson. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Gary Alderson, Quality Process for all Transtech. He started with ACF, ARI Industries, NDT expert. So we have a panel put together here that could address most anything that'll come up. But Don's going to kick it off and give you an overview of a quality manual, how it came together. And with that, Don, take it away.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the MARTS group. I appreciate being offered this time to talk about the M1003 quality program and the quality manual. So the next few minutes I'm going to be talking about the quality manual based on MSRP Section J M1003 Quality Assurance Specification. So what's the history of the AAR M1003 QA certification? It came from a Canadian standard in 1970. That was the basis for the M1003 program. First issued in 1985, it became part of the AAR Manual of Standards and Recommended Practices, as we know, MSRPs. Revised in 1995 and aligned to ISO in 1995, it became aligned with ISO 9001. Today, there are over 1,000 facilities certified to this program. So why was it implemented? In 1985, the AAR performed a pilot project with terminal roller bearings, and after implementation in 1003, catastrophic failures decreased almost 50%. Because of the success of the pilot program, the AAR believes having a quality program that monitors the controls in place for manufacturing process is critical. It is so important that today there are over 33 components and 53 AAR auditors. So, what is a quality management system? It's a program that requires facilities to have a formalized system of documented policies, processes, and procedures for consistently achieving customer requirements and objectives. A quality management system serves many purposes, including improving processes, reducing waste, lowering cost, facilitating and identifying training opportunities, and engaging staff. Quality assurance is the result of a quality management system, and quality assurance is a systematic process for checking to see whether products or services are being produced is meeting specified requirements. So now we all know what a quality management system is. There's also ISO 9000 that you're familiar with, and M1003. This is Chapter 2. This is what most of the quality assurance manuals are built around. There's 24 elements. We consider this the meat and potatoes of the program. It literally starts from purchasing of a purchased product of raw material and goes all the way through the final inspection, shipping, and preservation and packaging of materials of the final component. Again, you have to have documented procedures for all 24 of these elements. So here is what do you need to apply for M1003. I have we have an FAQ page that has all the links to apply for M1003 certification. Here, the panel is going to talk about some of the AAR auditors, the critical auditors' biggest issues with today's QA manuals. So I'm going to leave that for the panel. So this is some of the biggest questions we have. What's the difference between ISO 9001 manuals and AAR M1003 manuals? M1003, all these arrows are requirements of M1003. Products must meet applicable AAR technical specifications. Obviously, ISO is for the entire world. M1003 is for our railroad industry. Quality manuals must be in English. The quality assurance system evaluation audit form must be completed every year. The facility must subscribe to AAR circular orders and specifications. Facilities must use the 7.1 system for non-conformance reporting. And M1003 requires special processes. They must have function-specific training and applicable work experience and performed under controlled conditions by qualified personnel. So those are the differences between ISO and M1003. The AAR Quality Assurance Committee performed this gap analysis a few years ago, and I believe the 2015 or 2018 ISO was revised. Although both are quality assurance standards, there are several differences between M1003 and ISO. The most important, keeping in mind that M1003 is specific to our railroad industry. The specification itself is managed by the industry, and the AAR auditors are trained by our industry also.
Yep. All right. Short and sweet. Last year, when we did this, we ran out of time for questions. So this year, we purposely made it fairly open for questions. So one of the things that came to mind this morning when I was listening to the welding presentation and when I was reading through stuff that we've prepared was recognizing how much the industry has changed over the years, because back in the previous century and in the dark ages in the 70s when I was running repair shops, we didn't have any of these stinking manuals or procedures or anything, but it showed. And so it's important, the importance of these procedures, the manuals, it's critical to the industry, and we've benefited because of it. So, one of the things that we're doing this morning is we're opening up the floor to questions, if you have questions on how a quality manual is used, implemented, or even how to put it together, this is a time. We kind of cheated, though. We came up with our own list of questions, so we're going to start off with some of the questions we were going to ask ourselves. So one of the first questions that comes up is, document control is really critical, and it's really a pain in the butt for a distributed shop network. So how do you ensure that each shop in the network has the correct version of the quality manual? And that's a question really to Dean. I'll let you start that one.
Sure. So 2.7 is a requirement in Section J. It covers document control, and sorry if I'm not loud enough.
Yeah.
So we have 16 facilities across new car and repair. And the most important thing that we have to do is make sure, and this was stipulated in the previous presentation, was that our operators have the current and most appropriate version of information to perform their job. So at Trinity Rail, one of the things that we've done over the last several years is going from a paper-based system more to an electronic-based system and put information centers within our factories. That accomplishes a couple of things. It accomplishes rapid and immediate access to information, but it also controls version control. As we all know, it's a requirement for us to have the latest version of policies, procedures, or documentation on the shop floor at any given time, and have positive recall procedures to do that. So for us, to take that from a manual-based system to an electronic-based system reduces the human error involved in managing that kind of a program. That's been a big advancement for us. But ultimately, the requirement requires you to have a policy and a procedure, a practice in place in order to provide positive recall with regards to document control. So you can do that manually, and historically that's what we have done. But as we evolve, more things go digital, and we've gone down the digital age, if you will.
Joe, probably the same question, but a little spin on it is, a lot of your operations are remote. They're field units or mobile units. How do you rely more on paper on those guys that are not directly to an office? Joe?
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
Well, one of the things we do, there is certain copies, most of our field service units will have access, computer access on their trucks, but there is certain things that we keep still as a copy, as say a leak test procedure. We want that individual to have that leak test procedure on hand at the car, not in the computer, in the truck. So there is certain control documents that'll have leak test procedure, welding procedures. So if an auditor happens to walk up, ask them a question, even in the field, you have to be prepared. And so we will actually have some controlled copies of certain documents that they will have with them at the time of their testing.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to that loop of how do you know that they have how do they know they have the latest one?
Each location has a master document list. If revisions are issued, we also electronically, there's a notice sent out of that revision. So it's not like they have to search for a revision. So electronically, there's a notice. If I revise a document, everyone is going to get an automatic email with the revision that was put out.
Okay.
I just make a comment, in the audits that I perform, that's what I ask for. Let's see your master list, for example. And getting that person in the key position, like such as typically a QA manager, right? To maintain that master list seems to be a struggle. I mean, for many years now, I've done audits, and you just need that one person who is, responsible for the document control. And it's hard to find that person in an audit sometimes, and it's hard to find that actual master list and match it up with documents out in the shop. You know, I find that to be an issue.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else finds that problem, but.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, is that, you know, sometimes we live in that fantasy world that we can have everything digital and everybody has access.
Yeah.
But the last thing you want to do is have an iPad sitting on the shop floor, because it'll be gone or be destroyed. So, again, that question is, can it really exist digitally or electronically, or do you have to have a hard copy? And again, how do you control it? Don?
Yeah, M1003 doesn't state you have to have a hard copy manual, so yes, you can have an electronic manual. It just needs to be available to everybody who needs it, including the AAR accredited auditor.
Okay. Go back to Don. What are some of the common findings you find, Steve mentioned there's like 87 findings, but what do you specifically related to the quality manual or its implementation? What are some of the common things you trip up on?
I have a couple items. A lot of it, there's sometimes the quality assurance manuals don't reference procedures, so there's no roadmap to the facility's quality management system. So the auditor has to take a deeper dive into the facility's quality management system, which takes more time and could lead to him trying to decipher and come up with his own purpose. Also, there's lack of very weak purpose and scope for each of the elements. So in other words, not elaborating too much into the system. A lot of times there's some findings on there's no revision history, or the manual's not signed off by a corporate representative. Some facilities stating they're not using statistical analysis or processes, yet we see graphs and charts depicting production rates, rework rates, et cetera, on the walls. So they just don't know they're using stat analysis. And one of the biggest ones I see a lot with international facilities is the QA manual following the ISO format and not broke down by the 24 elements. This also takes the AA auditor more time to perform a deeper dive into the facility's quality management system, and which leads him to make some interpretations.
Gary, you want to?
Basically, again, back to document control, that's the one that really, 2.7 and 2.8 are the highest hitters, as we say. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, again, concentrating on document control and just having that person in charge, that's the one that really, we find a lot, excuse me, a lot of that missing. So electronic is fine, and you mentioned iPads, and I know of a company that's actually using iPads, and it just has the company intranet on the iPad, and everything's available electronic, and it works great, and they figure out a way to, find my iPad in case somebody takes it home, right? Which is bound to happen, but nothing wrong with electronic distribution. And then again, on the master list that you maintain, that person maintains, they're going to have, for the location, it's going to be on R drive or S drive or some drive that everybody has access to, right? I don't know if anybody in the audience uses it that way, but, having that common drive and having people having access to the document there works well. Tablets are becoming popular. But I still say, the thing is, somebody has to be responsible.
Right.
And it's hard to find that person to be responsible.
Jump in.
I have a question. Hopefully you can hear me without the microphone, but
Yeah.
talking about technology,
Use the mic. You're supposed to know this stuff. Bad example.
Talking about technology integrating with manuals and procedure, hard copy procedures. So the question probably isn't more for the panel, so you like to comment on it. I know Gerard was talking about some are hard copy, some are electronic in his world right now, but how does the AAR interpret if you go electronic, you're in a field truck, and you can't get a connection? Are you no longer present with the procedures? I mean, how would that be interpreted if you can't get it, if you can't bring it up? If MID happens to be there at that time, and you say, it's all right here. Yeah, it's going to be here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How would that be
Slow connection.
interpreted? Because I think going electronic is the thing to do, and that's the way of the world, right? Everything going electronic, that's the best way, fastest, most accurate, all that. So maybe Don can answer that.
Yeah, if that's not available to the operator, I would consider that to be a finding.
Okay.
It has to be available to the auditor for point of use. Work instructions, if you're talking about work instructions, yes, that must be there. The quality manual, they must have access to that. I don't know, Steve, I don't know if you want to jump in there at all?
Well, while Steve's thinking about his answer,
He said thanks when you answered.
of this audience, show of hands, how many rely on paper exclusively? How many rely on electronics? So I'll start with paper first. Who relies on paper exclusively?
Wow.
Wow. Well, Million Trees, just thank you. I assume the rest of you guys are electronic?
Hybrid.
Or combo?
Majority of them would be combo.
Majority electronic? Okay. Steve, go ahead.
To your scenario, where the guy's out in the truck and he's doing a repair for a quality system, auditors have to have common sense. Should he have the process and procedure for the repair that he's doing? Yes. Would that be an exception if he didn't? Yes. Does he have access to the quality manual? Well, does he really need the quality manual for what he's doing? So you kind of have to use a little common sense in that avenue and take a look at it. From my perspective, and just myself, can't speak for the rest of the auditing agencies, I would look at what the guy is doing, and does he have what he needs to fulfill the job?
Okay. Got some, Dave?
Guess I better bring this up with that point, Randy. I would give it 2 years, and we're going to be, for the MSRPs, electronic only. Now, that doesn't mean you can't print them out, and we give you the characteristics you need for binders, what size, but in 2 years, MSRPs will be electronic only. And we're working on the field and office manual as well. It's a little more difficult to do, but that's another thing. So maybe only the field manual and the small S486 air brake handbook would be in paper.
Okay. 2 years. One of the IT people you might even access, and so anytime when they're in the field and don't have access to the internet or ready access, they could have a provision that every time they get back to the office, it automatically refreshes, so they have an offline version that is the most current when they walked out the door. So that's an IT thing, so as a solution. So anyway.
The only thing I would add is that, especially when it comes to mobile repair, some facilities will not allow you to take a phone, camera, tablet, or anything into the facility. So you have to be cautious that particular location you go to, you may have to have a printed copy of a procedure you're going to use, like a leak test, a well procedure. If the auditor walks up to you at that location, and the auditor probably is going to also know there's nothing electronic let into the plant, and he's going to ask for those.
I know we're staying on the same subject here, but just real quick, if you don't state in your document control procedure, for instance, I was at a shop recently, and they print like the leak test procedure, and they put the car number, the date, and their initials at the top of the page, and they say that's how they control it, and at the end of the day, they throw it away. I said, well, that's wonderful. And we go back to the office, I said, let me see your document control procedure. And it has nothing in there about what they're doing. So, say what you do what you say kind of thing. So, if you're going to do it that way, you're all electronic, but the mobile crew needs a leak test procedure, then it better state in the document control procedure and in your manual how you do that. That's all.
Good.
Just shifting real quick, because I wanted to make a comment about what Don had said. The question you asked him was one of the things that the biggest issues they're seeing with quality manuals. And Don, I think your first comment was that when we audit to the manual, it doesn't have references to procedures and so forth. And I wanted to make a comment to that because typically when you build a quality manual, if you don't make it easy for the user, it's definitely not going to be easy for the auditor. And the whole point of developing the quality manual is not to make it easy for the auditor, it's to make it easy for the user. And so these references that the AAR through their audit's been encouraging, and I think most facilities are getting in compliance with, having specific references to the applicable procedures within the quality manual gives the roadmap for the use of the quality manual. And it also helps for updating and really revisions that you make to procedures and make sure they're applicable to the manuals, et cetera. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that particular comment that Don made is in my point being, make the manual usable and make it easy to understand, and that'll help make it more effective.
Keep the lawyers out of the room. Gerard, maybe that's a good segue to the next question, talking about the quality manual, but how do you use that to prepare for an audit?
Well, first of all, you have to have a good understanding of your manual, and your employees actually should have been trained on the manual also. I'm not saying they need to know every word in the manual, but it's a good idea that you're providing training. For example, monthly, we take a procedure and we train on, but first of all your employees have to understand there is a manual, and then the second thing is that you're using. So as far as preparing for the audit, it doesn't do much good to have just the quality manager at the site understand that manual. All the employees, your plant manager on down, have to understand how does it affect what I do. And as far as preparing, each area of that manual covers a section in that facility. So if it's incoming material inspection, so your material department handles that, they have to have a good understanding of that procedure, how it affects their department. So that's how you can prepare. So if you want to be ready for when the AAR comes in, you have to make sure your employees are ready. The quality manager, they don't want to audit the quality manager. Most times, and I've been told this, that the auditor will say, I know you know what it says, but do your employees at the facility know what it says? And that's the training part. The constant training on the procedure that affects them, the constant training on if there is a revision of the manual. Every employee should know there's a revision of that manual out there. They shouldn't get caught surprised that, oh, there is a new one out there.
Dana's kind of going back to one of the thoughts we had before, was talking about the electronic and paper, and as these things evolve and how you get prepared for an audit, and when you prepared for the audit and everybody's cognizant of it, and let's talk about the guy receiving material, person receiving material. If it's electronic, how do they might have known it a month ago, but it got changed.
Well, that would be one of the things that, in our case, is if there is any type of revision, an email goes out that there is a revision. Now, there may be another email that follows it as far as some highlighted areas of what was revised, but you have to keep everybody informed.
Yeah.
Comment on that. It's important to know who requires what specific training. So if an operator, in order for him to do receiving inspection, he's qualified to do receiving inspection through particular training requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So if there's a revision to the requirement that he has to do his job, his training gets updated. So it's important to have a training matrix developed for each operator, for each employee as to with regards to this function that they perform within the business, and then through either your training manager or your human resources or whoever you've deemed responsible for training within that facility, when there's revisions to the requirements, then that triggers an updated training requirement for the employee.
That was actually the segue I was going for, was how do you document it? Or there's no document requirement, as far as I know, that they've been qualified on that procedure?
Well, there's a number of different requirements and different requirements.
Yeah, requirements.
And at least from our perspective, by job function, you list out the required training. And it can go all the way from hazmat, function-specific training, to specific calibration procedural training, if they happen to be a calibration tech. Another example could be a forklift operator, if he needs safety training for that, whatever it's appropriate. But to have a matrix based on the job function, have the job function tied to the individual, have the job functions tied to specific training revisions, et cetera. That's how we tend to control it.
Just a comment. So as far as building the QA manual in that case, then what you're looking for is in 2.22 training, okay? You're going to talk about how and who is responsible for that training, and then you're going to reference a quality or a training procedure. So within that training procedure, you would have the training matrix that Dean mentioned. So again, as far as building the manual, that's how it would proceed. The other thing I wanted to mention on preparing for, you're saying preparing for the audit, right?
Right, yeah.
So you have 2.19 and you have QASE comparison checklist. So you can go through the checklist and you can go through your manual to prepare for the audit, so just something else that you could use.
And is that something from the shops? Do you normally do like if you know what audit's coming, you prepare for it, but is it something that it's systematic that every quarter, every semi-annual, your shops do an audit of the quality process? Is that how you make sure it's in compliance, Dean, or
Yeah,
Rod?
either one of them can answer it, but there's a requirement for internal auditing. So a couple different major requirements from a management review and from internal auditing. And from our perspective, we kind of evolved circular, if you will, from the main internal requirement to an external audit that happens at a corporate level to customer and AAR regulatory federal. So from our perspective, not only do we have internal requirements to frequently stress our own system, our quality management system, but it gets layered upon when you kind of go up the food chain all the way to the FRA. So depending on who shows up, but every facility will or should do internal auditing at a minimum, and then be able to demonstrate that internal auditing is occurring and it's effective.
Yeah. Gerard?
Right. And the other thing with the internal audits, your checklist, each facility would have their own checklist. You want to make sure it's completely filled out. One of the things as far as AAR, when they come and look at your internal audit, if they see a lot of blanks, they're going to look at those areas as they figure you didn't look at those areas. So if you're thorough at your internal audit, you've identified the nonconformances. If you've addressed those with corrective actions, the AAR should not find those same findings, or any outside agency.
Yeah, in the previous sessions, Steve mentioned that it's very disgusting when you come into a shop and you find the same thing, which is annoying. So, Don, what do you expect when you have a finding, when you see something in a quality manual that is out of whack for some reason? Is it something that you have to you start at the top and work your way down, or is it a bottom-up approach?
I believe it'd probably be bottom-up. You'd probably, if it's a finding during an audit, and requires a work procedure revision, you'd start there, revise the procedure. And it could go all the way up to the quality manual, depending on how the work instructions tie into the quality manual. But yes, if there is a finding that affects the quality manual, the highest tier, then yes, it would need to be revised. And the revision would also have to be identified and logged, and also the facility would have to be trained to that work instruction, that work procedures that was revised, and same with the quality manual.
Yeah, when you see a finding coming up or something that's getting discussed quite a bit, how does that get rippled out into the industry, I guess is a good way to say it?
To the industry?
To the industry, because a lot of times, we have all kinds of documentation tells us how to put the quality manual together, and then as it's being used, there'll be some findings that kind of crop up all the time. How does that get rolled into the overall editing, I guess would be the nice way to say that?
Oh, you mean to, like, edit the manual?
Yeah.
Based on, it's a good question. I mean, it's just experience. I mean, in my case, I go to a lot of different shops, and I see a lot of different scenarios, if you will. And so that could lead to, we should look at, 2.6.2, and we should try to decide, how the shop should be handling this situation. So, not really sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, that's what I was going to throw it over to the shop side now.
Well, actually, it kind of more comes from the AAR and the different committees. Every year, we identify what's our focus sections, if you will, of Section J. So the auditors that come in, they're paying special attention to those particular sections. And the reason they're paying special attention to those particular sections, because that's where we're finding more of the findings.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you from the recipient of these audits, the auditors come in typically looking for things that they've seen elsewhere. That's just natural. And so when you see repetitive issues at other shops or throughout industry, it comes back to us inadvertently through the auditor's focus based on their experience that they've had at recent audits. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. One is industry establishes what the focus is for each audit year, beyond all elements, but specific elements, and then auditors based on what they've seen at other facilities. And for us, at times they'll go from one facility to the next within our network. So they don't like to see repetitive things within our network, let alone outside in the industry.
Gerard, when an audit finding is made aware at the shop level, I guess, how quickly does that, that's a wrong way to ask the question. So how do you first deal with the immediate question, and then how does it get rolled up into the manual and back out to the shop? Because some of the times they'll just say, this auditor was on me, and we've survived so many audits, and this has not been a problem. How does it get dealt with at kind of the ground level?
We have your corrective action process that you'll follow. So that's the start of it. And usually you're going to have a team that's going to be developed to try to work through that. So if it's a procedural change or something like that, or if it goes back all the way to the manual, but there's usually going to be a team that's going to work on it. You're going to identify it. If it's just a procedural change, the effect of it is going to be, yes, you're going to revise the procedure, and then, yes, you're going to issue it. You're going to have to provide training on it to make sure all your other locations. The other thing that's good is if you have a finding at one shop and they didn't follow the procedure, it doesn't reflect you need to revise the procedure, but you're going to, review your other locations and just verify. You're going to share that finding. Okay, take a look at what this shop had a finding on, make sure we don't have the same finding again.
Do all the shops have a clear definition of who's responsible for the quality manual?
Well, basically that falls back onto the quality manager at the corporate level, but the input is going to come from the locations. Bottom line is, if you write a manual that nobody can follow, or no one can put in place, then there's a problem. If it's something that they can't do, or say as a procedure, if they can't follow the procedure, then you have to look at, can they really meet the requirements? So you need that involvement from the shop level floor that says, this isn't what we really do. So if somebody that wrote the procedure has no clue what's going on or doesn't know what the shop is really doing, then you have to have that team effort involved in it
Yeah.
and make the revision.
You got to remember that there's a minimum requirement to play. So in order to be M1003 certified, you have to meet the minimum requirements as stipulated within Section J. So you have to have management commitment to that. The manual references how you are going to meet the requirements. So there's a minimum, like I said, commitment to play, and you have to have management engagement. So if you develop over and above the minimum requirement, something that the business can't stipulate or business can't support, that's a business decision. But at a minimum, if you implement a quality manual and has requirements in it, that's your management commitment to comply. And if you can't comply, you either have to revise if it's allowed within the standard, or comply.
Don, when you're looking at it from a, let's say, management commitment, that's a great word. How high up the chain do we go? Is that a manager of the shop, or is it somebody, are you looking for a sign-off by the CEO? I mean, somewhere in between.
Yeah, Section J 1003 does not state who should be responsible for that manual. So the facility itself can assign, in most cases, it's quality manager, but they can assign whomever is responsible for that manual.
And that's on a shop network, and Dean, it'd probably be at your
Well, I
level.
think the important thing is, I mean, we tie it to our management responsibility. So when we have our management review every year, we tie it to who's participating within that management review. And at us, it's at the business unit president level. So it's not quite at the CEO, but it's darn close. And our good friends in the government would call it one of the senior most jailable officials.
Yeah, I always hated that word. Made me twitchy, but that's, I understood that, yeah, I know. So far, I'm okay. But do they sign off on every revision, or is it just?
No. Practically, that's impractical to have somebody at senior executive level signing off of procedural revisions. So that's designated. But as far as the overall quality program, it tends to be at a higher level.
Now, I've seen in my past life where, the top executive did sign off on each one. So, you have your external audit, AAR, then you have your internal audit, or vice versa. Then typically after that, it's the executive review. And then based on all of that is when you decide, okay, we need to revise our manual, incoming material inspection procedure, for example. And, like I said, in my past life, that person was there, that person and the director of quality both signed off on the changes. And then the training proceeded from there.
Okay. Highest jailable executive. Discuss.
It wasn't my quote.
Okay, well, these probably came up with that one. All right. This one is an interesting kind of twist to me, is when we're looking at the quality manual and electronic. As we move to electronic, how do you keep track of the revisions? And how do you, is there any requirement for retention of the old versions? Or any value or any requirement? So maybe I'll start with Donna. Is there any requirement to keep the old versions of a quality manual?
When you revise a manual, you should have a revision log, and even if it's electronic or a hard copy, but you have to have a revision log. And again, after you revised the quality manual, you would need some type of some documentation that the workforce or the management has been trained to that quality manual, the new revision.
So Gary, as a revision gets rolled out and the old one goes away, does it have to be saved?
I would say there's no requirement, right? But a best practice would be, I have an archive of the previous revision of that manual, and I can refer to it. And the other thing I like to do is put revision bars, in the manual on the right margin, so you have, you know what was changed in this revision. Same with the procedures, if they're revised. Then when a person looks at revision E, here's a bar on the right margin, this paragraph was changed, and it can all be electronic.
Every time I see those change bars, but I say, well, what was there before?
Yeah.
It just, if you don't know. So Dino, is there an archive that you guys maintain?
Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, revision control is pretty typical, but from our perspective, we maintain archives of all previous revisions. I think it's more practical or more important, if you will, on the procedural side, because the amount of language that can be changed when you're updating procedures. But data's pretty cheap right now, and as we've entered the electronic age, so maintaining previous versions of documents is pretty simple, and we typically do it. The importance is that you limit access, so that an old version doesn't inadvertently get published in an area that can be accessed by others and assumed as the current version. That's really the key as far as control.
Yeah. George?
And one other thing I'd like to add is, just in case, procedures do change, and if an auditor came in, whatever the date was, that's the procedure he's actually going to audit against. So let's say it was a leak test procedure or something, you made a change to that leak test procedure. More recently, there could be two different reflections on what they did in the procedure. So you have to be able to present the procedure that was in place at that time.
Yeah. We first ran into that when we all started going to computer-aided drafting and realized that we were destroying the old drawings all the time, and so document control became very, very important. So, we've been kind of asking our questions that we had already made up. So, has this stimulated any questions from the audience? Is there anything that you dying to know and how to implement or how to change? The floor is open. Microphone, Dave. To the microphone. Everything has to be recorded for posterity.
So Don, I guess I'll generally direct this towards you, but we'll see how it goes from there. But so in section J 2.6 for corrective and preventive action, it talks about root cause analysis for your nonconformances. And I know that the AAR gives a class a few times a year on root cause analysis, but that class is not a required class. Can you just give us like a general overview on how an M1003 certified facility should comply with root cause analysis requirements?
Yeah, I don't have anything in front of me, but I'll do my best. Yeah, the AAR has adopted, the Quality Assurance Committee has adopted the 5-step root cause and corrective action process. As most of us in here know, that step number 1, you define the problem. Step number 2, you contain the problem, stop the bleeding, right? Step number 3 is a very important one. That's where you determine the root cause, and that one's called the RCA, root cause analysis. And this step, you're identifying the root cause with some method of quality tools, whether it's the fishbone Ishikawa chart, the fishbone graph. You can use 5 Ys, you can use 8 Ds, the A3, whatever your background is. We have a lot of automotive, a lot of airline industry. There's a dozen Kaizen tools. There's a lot of tools you can use for that root cause analysis step, and that's step number 3. And the AAR is moving towards, the auditors are moving towards looking at that root cause and the methods that they used in that step number 3. That step number 3 is, we're looking at these tools to use, and we're looking for objective evidence in that step, or at least that's the direction we're moving into. Step number 4 is a corrective action that corrected that step number 3, right? That's number 4. And the step number 5 is verification, whether it's the following day or 3 months later during an audit. You're verifying that that corrective action in step 4 fixed that root cause in step number 3. So again, this is a 5-step root cause and corrective action process the AAR has adopted, and when you have findings, that's what the auditor is looking for, if you perform these 5 steps to fix that problem.
Okay, good.
Did I answer everything?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Don't be shy.
So as a follow-up to that, since you've adopted those 5 whys and all that, has the 7.1's gone up, gone down, stayed the same, non-conformance changes at all after that adoption?
Good question. I haven't ran the data for a while, but it's about evened out. When you're talking about a 7.1 non-conformance, it's all done online, and it also uses that 5-step root cause and corrective action process. It's not just for an audit finding, it's also for 7.1 non-conformances. But as far as the totals, I haven't seen much difference between the previous few years and this year.
Second opinion?
Yeah, I'm going to feed off that 7.1 question, which was good. I appreciate that. Who is supposed to fill out the 7.1s? Is it just M1003 facilities?
I believe this question was for Dean. If I understand your question right, who fills them out? A 7.1 is filled out by a person receiving a defective component or component that's failed within its warranty period. A 7.1 is filled out, it's called a 7.1 form, and so if you receive a faulty component or a component that's failed within the warranty period, as I mentioned, so you fill out the 7.1. The 7.2, that's sent to the person who sent the faulty component. Now, the 7.2 is filled out by the person that sent you that, correct? And they are the person that's supposed to do the 5-step root cause and corrective action process. And again, the 7.3, which you close it out, is the person that received it in the first place. But I think your question went a little further than that and saying who's allowed to file a 7.1. Any M1003 certified facility can receive a 7.1, but anybody that, even if you're not certified to M1003, you're allowed to file 7.1 against it. So if you're a two-person shop not performing any activities on Appendix A, then you can still file a 7.1 against a supplier. Does that answer your question?
I think the key is that you have to be able to actually enter that supplier's information into the system, and that can only be an M1003 facility.
That's correct.
The reconditioner or the supplier of the service
defective
has to be in
component.
1003, but my point was anyone that receives that product
Yes.
or that item or that service can fill one out.
Yeah, but only an M1003 facility is required to.
No, I believe you're wrong. Check the field manual out.
Okay.
That was my point. My point is, any repair facility that receives a bad air brake portion, a bad valve, a bad wheel, is supposed to complete the 7.1. So it's anybody who receives the defective part is supposed to be able to fill that out.
Okay. Cool. Any more questions? I have one. I always have questions. Just as, I'll go to the panel, and you know, we spent about a portion of an hour going through the quality manual implementation thing. What is that one thing that you want this audience to take away from this presentation? Don, I'll start with you.
I believe the most important is just keeping it up to date and making sure your workforce is trained per the current level, revision level of that quality manual. And I believe in having it documented that you did train your workforce. One of the good ways to do that is by doing the full 29-element audit. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's awake. 24-element audit?
You added the
Got
few?
me?
Okay?
Pretty much, for me, and this is what I talk about with my quality manual workshop, is, you start out with that inspection and test plan, and you take it from, incoming material, what's next? Typically, work order gets made or so forth. So that, when we talk about this has to apply through the entire process. So, typically I'll go to a whiteboard and I'll start laying out that inspection and test plan. What's the flow, okay? Today's world, the next step has to be, somewhere in the beginning has to be contract review, okay? So you have to make sure you get that up front, even though it's towards, 2.23 and Chapter 2, it needs to be up front because of various regulations and so forth. Going through that inspection and test plan and putting in hold points, to me, if you learn that, then you can do just about anything else, because the hold points allow you to build the quality into the product as it goes through the process. So if I have a hold point 1 and, on my flow chart, very simple, doesn't have to be all the triangles and squares that confuses everybody, just very simple rectangles with the flow, and here's hold point 1, and then you have a way to track that out in the shop and say, was hold point 1 reviewed, performed by the worker and approved by quality assurance? Yes. Okay, the next process is this, and then we continue through to final shipment. So to me, that's the basis of, building the quality manual, getting those processes in there, getting the hold points in there, so at final inspection, it's just a walk around and everything is complete, and that's the way it should work. So for me, that's what you should take away from
Yeah,
this.
from my manufacturing days, it always drove me nuts if we got to the end of the line and had like this myriad of problems that
That's a
people
nonconformance.
and kicked it down the road. So we learned how to stop that. So I love that one. Gerard?
I want to add on to what Don said about, providing the training if you revise the manual. And then also, one step farther is the procedures. Years ago, you could used to get ready for an audit in a week, an internal audit, an external audit. And that's what our industry did. And, for the last maybe 10, 15 years, we've changed, okay? You have to prepare yourself for audits, but you have to do it every day of the week. The days of a week before the audit getting ready doesn't work anymore. So you have to live the manual, and you have to understand, everybody has to understand you have a manual, what's in the manual, and then also the procedures. You have to really make sure your employees understand the procedures. That's where the manual is going to make the biggest difference, if the employees understand the procedures.
Cool. Dean?
Yeah, I'm kind of somewhat of a broken record, but I think, creating the manual is somewhat of a desktop exercise because we have a roadmap on how to do it. But it's the implementation and the earlier comment I made about management commitment to making it effective that's most important. And that's done through not only the internal audits, but it's done through a really robust training program and management oversight. So to me, that's the most important aspect of implementing an effective quality manual or quality management system program out there.
Yeah. And make it so that the worker understands the bloody thing.
Yeah, and make it applicable to their work.
Yeah.
We can't expect the worker to understand the entire quality manual. That's unrealistic. I would challenge any facility to show me a compliance system that does that. So being able to break down the quality management system, the quality manual as it applies to the operator or the worker and their job function is really the key to a successful implementation.
Cool. Tomorrow afternoon, Gary's going to be conducting a 4-hour session on how to build a effective quality manual. So that's another thing that's, if you need help there, it's going to be done tomorrow afternoon, 1 to 5, I think?
Yeah, but it's not just, I'm going to do a 2-hour presentation on the ABCs of building a quality manual, and then John Byrne is here. He's going to do a presentation, and also Brad Ivy. So that's all part of the...
So you're not on for a 4-hour
Yeah.
Good move there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for participating in this first session. Our next session is going to start very quickly, and Jerry's going to introduce that, but I would like to thank our panelists for taking the time and contributing, and please give them a hand. Great job. All right. Thanks, guys.